Mercedes is planning a huge upgrade package for Imola, and it seems like the Silver Arrows have a little bit of better understanding as to why the car's performance is so off balance at the beginning of 2024. However, with many other teams also bringing a lot of upgrades, and with the initial step of the Silver Arrows not being nearly as close as the one of Ferrari and McLaren, could we see an actual improvement from the team? And if so, who would lead the charge ahead, Russell or Hamilton? Well, it seems like Mercedes doesn't plan on hanging around the 4th spot in the Constructors' Championship for a longer period of time, which is why a huge aerodynamic upgrade package is coming to Imola, the track on which almost the entire grid will bring an upgrade. However, with all the issues that Mercedes had with the W15, especially in the drastic variations compared to a track surface with a difference of a couple of degrees, the nature of these problems seem way too specific, and it's still unclear whether Mercedes will be able to fix the majority of the flaws in just one weekend. When talking about the primary deficit of the car, Toto Wolff commented about how they registered as much as 70 downforce points in one corner in Melbourne in the simulator, more than what they actually extracted from that actual corner in the real-life race, which is a difference that could vary between 1 and 1.5 seconds of performance. We all know that Mercedes has been vaguely open about the correlation issues they have between the simulated data and the on-track performance with the W15. So, if this statement is to be understood seriously, then it's either the fact that Mercedes will be super competitive in Imola and turn into a podium challenger all of a sudden, or they will make an improvement big enough to be considered as one, but small enough to challenge the rest of the grid ahead. Elaborating on the latest issues of Mercedes that became visible yet again in Suzuka and how the team plans to treat them in the foreseeable future, Wolff went on to say, "We've measured the downforce and we see it in the simulator, but we're simply not able to extract it in lap time as we should and as the simulation tells us. The car is so complex in terms of aerodynamic and mechanical balance as well as correlation. We have followed a certain trajectory in recent years but without finding a full solution. So we've got to the point of saying, okay, we have to do something different, because by measuring the downforce with our sensors and pressure taps, we have 70 points of extra downforce in a particular curve in Melbourne compared to last year, but we don't see them in the lap time." This is a very important statement, and it should be understood as such, because if this is true, and if Mercedes is able to unlock those 70 downforce points with the Imola upgrade package, then don't be surprised if you see the W15 being very close to the RB20 and being the second fastest team all of a sudden. However, the harsh reality is that no matter how much we're liking for this to happen for Hamilton's last season with the team, it's very tough to unlock such an amount of performance. We've seen that with Ferrari, the team was extremely happy to bring 30 downforce points more in the winter period in what was labelled as a very conservative approach with the car. And just because the team sees the downforce, it doesn't mean it's applicable and usable on the car. One of the worst issues that Mercedes had in the past couple of years was having excessive downforce that always kicked the car out of the sweet spot. This is something that Hamilton has talked about numerous times throughout the past couple of years, and how the platform that Mercedes has worked on up until the 2024 season brought nothing but bad news for him and his team. Regardless of that, the engineers didn't listen to him, and it took 2 years for them to understand that a new design and philosophy would be needed in order to have any shot at the competition ahead. Right now, the situation is very difficult because we don't know if these downforce points are something that Mercedes possesses truly, or if Wolff is trying to make a lot of people happy on the Mercedes board, given the fact that they dropped from P2 last year to fighting for P4 with Aston Martin this season, inevitably losing the battles against McLaren and Ferrari. And even if they do, a downforce point is a very interesting variable that could bring different values to the team. For example, the universally accepted value is equivalent to about 1% of the car's lift coefficient, which in the case of Formula 1 cars would be the downward thrust. In this case, what Mercedes needs, and probably did understand before the Imola upgrades, is that these downforce points do not tell you how the aerodynamic balance is impacted on the car. Therefore, you cannot make a judgment as to whether or not improving it will help you with the understeer or the oversteer in a corner. Another very viable option is that Mercedes does indeed have these 70 downforce points to unlock, and they're set to bring anywhere between 1 and 1.5 seconds of performance, but their mechanical platform is so bad that it won't sustain such an upgrade package, making the car non-drivable like it was in the past couple of years. Remember, it's very important to have a stable platform to work on, and if you are to look at Ferrari, they're not extremely happy for finishing 20 seconds behind Red Bull in the first couple of races, with the exception of Australia, but they are happy that they finally have a stable platform onto which they can bring upgrades from aerodynamic nature, and they won't be repelled like in the past couple of years due to the technical and architectural limitations of the car. Therefore, some of the issues that Mercedes will focus on in Imola are also going to involve tyre degradation, because in Suzuka, they were forced to push a lot on the first stint in order to compensate for the lack of performance, which ate up the tyres of the car pretty badly. And if the aero balance of the car is struck in the right place, then it shouldn't be changing drastically through the corners that are creating downforce, which is one of the primary issues that Mercedes have had in the past couple of years and in the beginning of 2024 as well, having a lot of unusable downforce in the front and rear tyres depending on the corner type. Furthermore, we can also say that the tyre and tarmac interface are very likely not being maximised for grip, because if the car doesn't have enough heat generation for molecular adhesion at the tarmac, you'll end up with a grip that is not maximised, which is the last thing you want headed into a high-speed corner at 200 km per hour. Obviously, a very important factor here is the temperature of the tarmac and the tyres. Both of these factors play a pivotal role in Mercedes' recent issues. So while it's definitely an issue that Mercedes needs to fix, it's being viewed at more as a window than a situation or a problem. With the upgrade package in Imola, Mercedes will be aiming to fix the proportions between the aero balance and the platform dynamics, because you can never exclude the stiffness of the chassis, or more precisely, its ability to flex in these complex corners, as one of the primary issues for the huge deficit Mercedes has right now. Correlation issues are always going to be present, and whether or not they're as huge as Wolff presents them to the entire world, that's up for Mercedes to answer in the following races and throughout the entire campaign. Now, if the issues that Mercedes has experienced in the first 4 races are more of an aero balance type and not from a mechanical point of view, then the upgrades that are bound for Imola will help the team in not only understanding more about the car, but also improving it to a point where they could legitimately fight for the higher positions and not be satisfied with the scrap points that come from P6 and below. Regardless of that, we must add that the rest of the grid won't be standing still, with Ferrari hoping to unlock 0.3 per second in Imola and take the fight to Red Bull much closer, whereas McLaren and Aston Martin have also established that there is a stable platform to bring upgrades to in the next couple of races. The Silverstone-based squad brought an aggressive upgrade package to the AMR24 in Japan and will likely continue to develop it in Imola, and as we saw, they were quite competitive compared to Mercedes. So even though we might not have expected this at the beginning of the season, it's almost definite that Mercedes will be stuck in the midfield if the Imola upgrades do not work as planned. With all this in mind, the question of whether or not Russell would be able to get the upper hand against his teammate once the car starts to evolve remains to be answered, because the 7-time world champion admitted that the last thing on his mind is not to be competitive throughout the 2024 campaign, despite all the trouble he's gone through in the first 4 races of the season. Be that as it may, do you think that Mercedes has what it takes to turn things around in Imola? And more importantly, do you think that they finally understand where they can unlock performance out of their car? Let us know in the comments down below.